You're listening to a podcast by the Center for Action and Contemplation. To learn more, visit cac.org.
Friends, welcome back to the Everything Belongs podcast with our beloved Father Richard Rohr. Each episode, the one and only Paul Swanson and I travel over to Richard's little house to unpack some big wisdom with him. And then we're joined by a guest who helps us live the teachings forward, to explore and expand on Richard's wisdom in new ways by asking new questions emerging in our rapidly changing world. Each season, we've explored an aspect of Richard's deep teachings, usually by going chapter by chapter through one of his books. So far, we've looked at his book, Falling Upward, we've looked at Eager to Love, and last season, we looked at Richard's latest book, The Tears of Things. But this season is a little different because this season, we're going back to one of Richard's early passions. We're exploring the Enneagram, a contemporary tool that draws on ancient wisdom for discernment, solidarity, and self-discovery. If you'd like to read along, you can of course pick up Richard's book, The Enneagram, A Christian Perspective. We know a lot of our audience first met Richard years ago as an Enneagram teacher, and now we get to chat with Richard in his 83rd year, asking him about what he's continued to learn 36 years after his book was first published, as we all get to explore together how our wounds can lead us to wisdom and to finding our work in the world. This week, we have at last come to the most exciting number on the Enneagram, or at least the number that thinks it's the most exciting, our fantastic and fabulous big feeling fours. First, Richard tells Paul and I about how fours carry the need to be special, that they crave beauty and authenticity. Then Carmen Acevedo Butcher and I get to talk to our guest, Dorcas Cheng-Tozun, the author of one of my favorite books, Social Justice for the Sensitive Soul. Dorcas talks to us about how the deep feeling nature of a four often leads them to empathy and wanting to make the world a better place. But that same depth of feeling also can leave them feeling overwhelmed. And there is so much wisdom there for all of us. I am so excited to share this episode with all of you. So without further ado, let's go hear from Richard about why the 4 is his favorite number, or at least ought to be. From the Center for Action and Contemplation, I'm Mike Petro.
I'm Paul Swanson.
I'm Carmen Acevedo Butcher.
I'm Cassidy Hall.
And I'm Drew Jackson.
And this is Everything Belongs.
Richard, Paul, it is good to be with you here today again in the Hermitage. Richard, I know we're here today to talk about your favorite of all
favorite,
9
hands down
numbers. For years, I've been trying to convince Richard that Jesus was a 4. You know that he had a fancy garment that had no seam. He was a man of sorrows that had nowhere to lay his head. He was underappreciated in his hometown. He was a master storyteller and a master of mood. He had high emotional intelligence. Clearly, I think Jesus embodies for us.
Good arguments right there.
I mean, I think a lot about it.
Well, that's your narcissism.
Starting with the bang.
Well, we'll probably get back to this. I love that you talk about Joseph the dreamer, Joseph the provider as an example. I think about one of my great teachers, Carl Jung, as someone who is clearly an Enneagram 4. I'm so excited to unpack this one with you. And yes, if my narcissism shines a little bit, I apologize.
I'm just saying that facetiously. Half.
Richard, as Mike just mentioned, we're here to talk about the Enneagram 4, which you identify with the need to be special. In your Enneagram book, you write, 4s put their gifts to work to awaken a sense of beauty and harmony in their surroundings. They are highly sensitive and almost always artistically gifted. They can express their feelings in dance, music, painting, the theater, or literature. Everything with vital energy attracts them. They grasp the moods and feelings of other people and the atmosphere of places and events with seismographic precision, great word.
Mm-hmm.
They are more at home in the realm of the unconscious, of symbols and dreams than in the real world. 4s strive to be aesthetically attractive, to be exceptional, to be creative, or in some cases, to appear esoteric, eccentric, extravagant, or exotic. This is quite a description that you have
Boy,
here.
that is.
I mean, clearly the best number.
I wrote that 20 some years ago, but it stands.
It stands. What can you tell us about these fabulous and fantastic fours?
Okay, they're the easiest number to spot because they beg to be spotted. They hate the ordinary. They love being offbeat, and they excel at it. Eccentric, off-center. The ordinary is boring to a 4. They love the extraordinary. And thank God for them. So much would not have been painted, said well, or performed if there weren't 4s.
One thing I noticed about 4s is they have a particular devotion to beauty. Would you say that's true?
Absolutely, yes. The world will be saved by beauty.
Indeed.
Is their motto. They're still in the heart space, but now the heart space is moving from the relationality to the erotic. They're not shocked by the erotic.
Yeah.
There's a quote from Alan Watts that I love so much because it strikes me as being 4ness distilled into a declaration
Let me hear.
of independence. He says, I have always done things in my own way, which is at once the way that comes naturally to me, that is honest, sincere, genuine, and unforced, but also perverse. Although you must remember that this word means per, as in through, and verse, as in poetry. Out of the way and wayward, which is surely towards the way, and that to be queer, to follow our own weird, is wholeheartedly to accept our karma or fate or destiny, and thus to be odd in the service of God, in whose service, as the Anglican Book of Common Prayer declares, is perfect freedom. That to me feels like a very 4 statement.
Yeah,
I'm going
very
to
good.
do things in my own way, and it'll be poetic, and it'll be countercultural, and it'll go against the grain and with the grain at the same time. Does that make sense?
That's why we apply the word with not complete accuracy, narcissistic. It's got to be in their own way, or they can't be bothered by something that's too ordinary or too repetitive. They're really quite amazing people. They fascinate the rest of us, either with admiration or disgust.
And I hear you saying it's not iconoclastic, though.
It is.
It is.
Oh, yes. Not to the degree the 8 is. But they don't revel in rebelliousness. They revel in doing it specially,
Okay.
creatively. So it might look, and it often is, in effect, iconoclasm. But that's not the reason they're doing it.
They can't help it.
They can't help it. You see, Hollywood and the movie world, the TV world is just filled with 4s. And they keep the art form going by creating a new kind of personality, a new kind of costume.
I'd like to ask you something about that, particularly because you use the word costume, and we've already talked about personas. Because of 4's wounds and wisdom and this bent towards wanting to be original and special and to stand out, I feel like more than any other number, the 4s get judged by their personas. And I'm not just saying this because you constantly make fun of the way I dress and my hair.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But it adds to your point.
It does add to my point. No, we have fun. Richard's Coco Chanel'd me at one point. He's like, the next time you leave the house, take off one accessory, any one that you choose.
See, look at you can laugh at that. That's so healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's the reason I ask this, Richard, is because, you do write that 4s are easy to recognize. But I wonder if someone's listening to this and they really relate to the inner wound of the 4, but they don't express as overly artistic, or they're not a flashy 4. Does that automatically mean that they're disqualified? Do all 4s stand out in the way that they dress?
The more introverted personality, less so.
Okay.
That's what it amounts to. The more you're an extrovert, the more you're showy.
Okay, that
The
makes sense.
introvert doesn't need as much, but there'll still be signs on a well-placed brooch or something like that. We had a Franciscan in our community who was a 4, and we'd all come in our habits, uniformly dressed, but he'd have to have a rose pinned to his
Just a little something.
just something to make himself special.
Just a little something to be different. I once wondered if Richard Rohr was a secret 4, because every now and then I would see, a really cool hat or great glasses or just a little flourish.
No, we are relatable, the 1 and the 4, though.
Okay.
We like things well done. 1s are more moralistic about it.
Okay.
The 4 is more aesthetic. But both of us like quality,
Excellence,
class, well doneness. Just leave it at that.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful. Let's keep digging behind this need to stand out, to be special. And one of the ways we want to dive in that, Richard, is to ask you about the core wound of the Enneagram 4. I want to read a quote from you that you write in your book about how early loss can lead to a life of longing for a 4. So this comes from your book. You write, in their childhood, 4s have often had the experience of the present being unbearable and meaningless. Quite often, this was connected with a very painful experience of loss. This loss could be real: death of a parent, illegitimate birth, divorce, moving and being uprooted. An undependable parent, another child is born or preferred to them. Or it can have been felt only emotionally. Positive role models have been missing. Thus, the child in the search for identity turns toward the inner world, because the original source of love was missing or was too weak. New sources of love had to be created in the imagination. The longing of the 4s is directed to that lost love. It is at once the yearning to go home and to go far away. The life of the 4s is primarily shaped by longing, the longing for beauty and the wish of what the world and life would fit together into a harmonic whole. Richard, what can you tell us about the why and the how that 4s have to live in longing?
They seem to have learned that their suffering is what taught them. Their suffering is what makes them special. Being rejected, being a minority, being different. That's why longing is so identified with the 4. They long to be admired, to be famous, to be looked up to, and yet they can't let go of that. If it weren't there, they'd create it, because they've looked by self-observation. When they suffered is when they wrote their best novel, when they painted their best painting. They can't be creative in normalcy. They lose their muse if it's all normal, if it's all the same. So they early in life already pull themselves back from the pattern. They like asymmetry more than symmetry.
Thinking about this from a cultural lens, I'd like to take it a step further, Richard. I appreciate that in your chapter on the 4, you say that their life plan is the Parsifal myth, the quest for the Grail. And when I think about longing, so many of the great stories of Western culture are about this longing for home, even if it's a home we've never known. The Greeks called it the nostos. And it can be Adam and Eve longing to get back to the garden, Odysseus trying to get back to Ithaca, Parsifal searching for the Grail that he found and lost, Luke Skywalker looking out at the binary sunset, or Harry Potter looking into the mirror of Erised. But there is this longing at the heart of so many of the stories that we're raised on. So even folks who aren't 4s, I think, hear and relate to that. Why do you think that's embedded in the great myths of our culture? And is it because 4s are the best storytellers?
If you're going to say the human persona is body, soul, and spirit, the 4s are the masters of soul. They know how to evoke soul, how to name soul. It shows itself in their preoccupation with precise color. You can't just say blue to a 4. It's cobalt blue or azure blue or deep blue or navy blue, but that is crucial. I used to say it has a metaphysical quality to name the color correctly. It's easy to spot after a while because they'll comment on characteristics that other people wouldn't comment on, like the tonality of a color or a sound or a character in a play.
Well, and I so appreciate too what you're saying about 4s and souls, the longing being the engine of the soul. I think about Gregory of Nyssa basically saying that we are created as infinite capacities for desire or longing because we're built to love God and love others and desire that love as well. But that's a powerful statement to think about the soul as having longing in the DNA of it to bring us into that love relationship.
Yes.
Do you think 4s have a special responsibility in helping people manage that well?
That's well put, actually. Yeah, I wonder why that's true, but you take 4s out of the equation and the world becomes monochromatic, lacking in subtlety and depth. You take away poetry and art, any of the art forms, dance or music, and they always give depth to a culture, tell you what it's really about, what's going on and what's really going on. And the 4 knows how to spot that, maximize that, evoke that. They really are special people. And it's important, and it takes them a while to learn this, probably most of their 20s, to learn how not to overdo it. Because if they overdo it, they alienate more than they attract. But that's their very gift, is to recognize restraint and subtlety and nuance, to create a character in a play that is like no other. It's always got to be like no other. And when they're good at that, they're really good at that.
And this brings us to what you call the root sin for 4s is envy. How does this longing that we've been talking about have the potential to lead to envy?
They so desire to strike the right note, the right key, that when someone else does it better than they do, they are jealous. Envious is the correct word. Darn, I wish I had written that. Darn, I wish I had said that first, because they know it's right. It's that admiration of class that gives them their specialness. They can spot an artist. The trouble is, it makes for I'm told, not that I've lived there, but a catty world of imitation and failure at imitation and envy at those who do it better. But it's that very thing that keeps them on the search.
Mike, I'd love to ask you, how do you see that from your lens and experience as a 4?
I think deeply embedded inside the 4, and every episode we ask Richard what the voice of the inner accuser sounds like. And I think deeply embedded in the head of every 4 is a voice that does tell you that you're not special enough.
Yes.
And also you don't want to fit in because you don't want to be ordinary.
Yes.
But under that is a voice that tells you you'll never fit in, right? And so you do envy both people who are very special and people who are very ordinary. I read an essay about envy by the great Jungian teacher Anne Ulanoff at one point, and she said, inside envy, buried very deeply, is the fear of the good. Because it's easier for me to envy you for having something that I want than it is for me to try and actually embody that good.
Yeah.
Because deep down, I'm terrified of trying to get that and not obtaining it.
Yeah, the 4, they don't tend to be moralistic in the usual way you use that term. They're very accepting of the one who does it differently.
Yeah.
Even if it might be a little immoral or immoral. That patience with human suffering allows them to be patient with human suffering.
Yeah. And you're
human difference.
Yeah.
Human eccentricity. That's one of their most attractive qualities.
Yeah. And you have that in spades, Mike.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you do.
We think of fours as being overly emotional or prone to depression. You were saying fours have this capacity. They're not afraid of suffering. They're not afraid of difference. The vitality is in the variance for a four. You quoted Victor Hugo in your chapter, melancholy is the happiness of being sad.
If fours live in an atmosphere where their specialness is admired, allowed, trusted, they're happy. When it isn't, they're miserable.
Yeah.
They have to leave that town. They have to leave that religion.
Do fours like suffering, or are they just very familiar with it?
It's probably, I know I had a classmate in the seminary who was clearly a four. And, we were very clear we had to attend everything. You didn't disappear from the community. Well, he did. He would disappear for 2 days, and he'd come out having written an oratorio. He had to submit himself to sadness and suffering and alienation. And from that point came his great creativity. It was clear. He knew that in his soul. A lot of them left religious life because of its insistence on uniformity.
Would you say that fours have a head start on processing suffering because of all the internal tools and access they have to metaphor and myth as a way of looking out at reality, that it actually gives them a head start that can be a gift to the rest of us?
That's a good question.
Yes, but they go a little too far and romanticize it. My suffering makes me special. People who haven't suffered don't know. They always go a little too far.
One of the most profound conversations I've ever had in my entire life was with our friend Mirabai Starr. The first time she and I met and I heard her teach, and she talked about losing her daughter and all the suffering she'd been through, I went up and I asked her about suffering, and I talked to her about losing my mom and losing my brother. And I said, is there something about the spiritual life when you want to walk the spiritual path that it draws more suffering to you? Which is a very Enneagram 4 question. I'm the special person who's destined to suffer. And she said something to me that was medicine that could have been poison to anyone else. She said, the first thing I want you to know is you're not special. The universe has not put a target on your back to teach you a lesson.
Wow.
So she said, the universe isn't out to get you, but suffering can supercharge your spiritual life. And what she wasn't doing was putting me down. She was liberating me from the myth of specialness.
Uh-huh.
And it
what
was
a good teacher.
Really helpful. Yeah.
That's excellent. And you had the wherewithal to read it that way.
Yeah.
Very good.
Richard, what does this look like in a fours day to day? What games do fours play in the worthiness games? Like, how are they playing games, as we all do, but what does it look like for fours specifically?
They know how to be the loyal opposition, to create the alternative voice, the exception to the rule. Not in the totally rebellious way that the 8 does. Let's look at it this way. I sometimes think of it as invariably in a conversation, present an alternative viewpoint.
Yeah, they're good at opening windows to let some fresh air in.
That's well put. And they have to be affirmed for that, because you eliminate that from the conversation and you got boring uniformity where all that dominates is follow the rules, follow the rules, follow the rules.
Yeah, and I can see the shadow side of that for me, which even listeners would pick up on in this, is sometimes the desire to say something original can throw things completely off track.
That's true. That's good you could see that.
You said something that really stuck with me. You said there's a danger here for fours that others will be used only as emotional trigger mechanisms for longings, memories, and dreams. Is there a temptation for fours just to see other people as the characters in their grand story instead of the people who they truly are?
You'd have to say that's a temptation because everything's a metaphor. They're writing their unique script and they prefer and validate people who become character witnesses of this quality or that quality. So they could write such good drama. Shakespeare must have been a supreme four to describe so many personalities so well.
It seems like fours have pretty high emotional intelligence.
Yes, they do.
Would that make it hard for a four to type themselves in the Enneagram? Would they relate to a lot of different numbers?
They resist the Enneagram more than almost any number. They'll walk out of a class. I refuse to be classified until they realize, damn it, it's right on. I've seen many fours deeply resent the Enneagram. It puts them in a classification. They hate it.
I think we live in a culture that praises authenticity in inauthentic ways. So in the four's desire to be authentic, how do we not fall into the trap of being inauthentic in our desire to craft an authentic persona?
That's almost the pattern in your early 20s. You've got to try on this, try on that. This journey to authenticity is a lot of inauthenticity. You probably don't begin to recognize that till your early 30s at the earliest, where this is authentic for me.
Yeah.
And it's so important that parents be patient with that if their child is a four. If they force uniformity, they're going to create a very stunted child in a four. They can't be forced into a mold or they lose it.
I feel like it's why it's so important for kids to be allowed to use the word no, to be allowed, as intense as it is, to use the word hate, to express dislike, to express pain, and not have that be squashed.
That's right. Well put.
Just to take you back to these words that you wrote, fours are more at home in the realm of the unconscious, symbols and dreams, than in the real world. Symbols help them be themselves and express themselves. They also have the gift of helping others develop an eye for the beautiful and the world of dreams and symbols. And when I think about the power of symbol, and I always think about the power of storytelling as well, and then also longing, I wonder if there is something almost luciferic or bewitching about the energy of the four in our time and culture. Like, I think that with the advent of Freud and Jung and depth psychology, they sort of cracked the code on four energy. And then after that, for the last century and a half, advertising and propaganda has weaponized that and sort of weaponized the wisdom of the four, into cheap gimmicks to control people's hearts and minds. It seems like every moment of every day, especially as we're increasingly surrounded by screens, symbols, stories, and music are used to manipulate our moods, move our money, bend our beliefs and behaviors. Does that feel right to you?
That's so well said.
I even think about how we're overly gorged on all these quote unquote hero myths that encourage us to be authentic, but never lead us to service, right? Or sacrifice.
There's the narcissism.
How, in this moment in time, Richard, do we navigate having the cheapening of the energy of the four coming at us to manipulate us, whether it's political slogans or commercials?
My guess is you have to have people who model. They say Martha Graham spent her whole second half of life trying to train other dancers to do it as well as she did. We used to call fours actualizers, potentiators, who really revel. They see a young 20-year-old and they know he has the gift. And I want to use my remaining years to maximizing that gift instead of being the gift itself. That would be for overcoming their narcissism, where I know what's good and special, and I'm going to bring it out of young people. They can be very good educators.
It sounds like a healing of that envy too. No longer
very good.
The envy is being dropped in service to those they see gifted.
Instead of trying to make myself special, I'm trying to help everyone realize their own specialness.
I have a niece who's a 4, and we were sort of concerned about her as a little girl, her need to be special. But what her job now is low-cost housing. They often are drawn to issues of justice and peace because that is a way of critiquing the normal, of recognizing the abnormality of the normal. And they're often involved in peace work.
In doing the work, 4s are called to making beauty real by doing the work of peacemaking and justice, and maybe telling good stories and giving good art and symbols that counteract the ways that dominant culture is trying to weaponize those things against us.
This bias against the normal, because the normal, the way everybody thinks, the way everybody does it is almost always, forgive the overstatement, is almost always a world of injustice, favoring the rich and the powerful. Almost always. Show me a culture that idealized the poor. We idealize the top. The 4 recognizes the falsity of that. Even though they desire fame and celebrity status, they still know, forgive the word, it's a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah.
They know it's not true.
Well, and isn't that the paradox of even a 4 desiring fame and celebrity status? Because as soon as you would get it, you wouldn't want it because it would be something you have to conform to.
Right.
Well put, yeah.
So it's getting to the heart of that desire, which is validation.
What does the inner advocate, the inner voice of love, sound like to a 4 on their own healing path?
It teaches them and allows them to be patient, to realize it took me a long time to get here. So to be patient with early inauthenticity, early half sincerity. Without that patience, the judgments of a 4 can be very harsh on everybody who isn't as brilliant as they are, as creative as they are. They have to learn that by trial and error. You'll so often on TV hear actors or dramatists talk about how long it took them to get here, how many rejection slips. They have to go through that to appreciate true art as opposed to just fame, celebrity status. And that's their great temptation, to substitute fame for art. Now, the 4 part of them knows that's true. I've got to suffer many rejection slips before I can assume I know how to say it. Who am I to speak for 4s? But that strikes me as true in the 4s I know.
Richard, when that becomes mature, what does the wisdom of the 4 look like? You talk about the redeemed 4 embodies synthesis, mediation, and balance.
What allows a 4 to create a genuinely fresh character in a novel or a movie is subtlety. It's not a cliche. They hate cliche, and they create a personality without cliche. Who am I thinking of? Oh, Meryl Streep comes to mind, Marlon Brando. These truly great actors and actresses who, when you watch them, you're mesmerized by their authenticity, their capture of authenticity. You don't know that it's them, but boy, they've recognized themselves somewhere and know how to replicate it.
And I feel like the fours who are not famous actors or famous storytellers still carry that skill and maybe even that responsibility to help the people around them live in and make space for all those nuances to be real at the same time. You know, I think about the prevalence right now of parts work. So many people are doing IFS therapy and Jungian stuff, but any kind of presence that creates permission for us all to be more than one thing at a time, to be happy and sad, to be grateful and grieving. I mean, dare I say it, to create a space where everything belongs. How do you think, Richard, fours can do that in their ordinary day-to-day interactions with their friends and neighbors and family?
If they can have the heart space to validate and to affirm the breaking of the rules in the name of the rules, what the rules really mean, what the rules really stand for. I've had, if I can be so bold, I've had a lot of fours who are big fans of mine. And what they seem to admire is that, which I guess I do. I'm loyal to the tradition, and yet I appear to be an iconoclast of the tradition. They just love that because that's what they're trying to do too. Following the true rules allows them how to break the rules gracefully, subtly. They're masters of subtlety. They don't appreciate it if it's not subtle.
So part of the gift of the four, the wisdom that they share, is in modeling that so that others can learn their own sense of subtlety.
Yeah, they're sort of scientists of the soul and the great explorers of the interior. And then I guess the task is to bring it outward. I think about our beloved James Finley talking about how most people are just skimming on the surface of their own life and they're suffering depth deprivation. And the four longs more than anything, I think, when the four is healing and turning outward to invite people into those depths. But then I guess we can't stay there. Like we go into the depths, but we go into the depths with purpose.
That's true. You can get over enamored with your own in-depthness. Yeah. That's when you haven't been broken from your narcissism. That's the true of all 9 types. Why initiation is about the breaking your attachment to your ego. If that doesn't happen, none of the 9 types can produce well or create well.
So, Richard, to kind of land again in this kind of concrete way, what is the four's work in the world to do?
To help the rest of us not presume the way everybody does it is good. This equation with normalcy and moral goodness. The 4 is able to see right through that.
Richard, a final blessing for the 4s listening?
4s know that you have a gift, but don't over-identify with your gift. Let your gift torture you, which you understand. And let that suffering be an identification with the suffering people of the world, not your specialness, which is what does them in.
Amen. I love that blessing of furthering solidarity. That's
I hope
beautiful.
so.
Thank
Excellent.
you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard. It was
Thank
perfect.
you.
Much obliged.
Everything Belongs will continue in a moment.
How can we draw spiritual nourishment from the Christian tradition while honestly confronting the way its theology has been shaped by male-dominated systems? Our next online event, What Do Women Do with Christianity, on September 11th, 2026, will explore the history and ongoing challenges of patriarchy within the Christian tradition, guided by Carmen Acevedo Butcher and Christine Valters Paintner. Learn more at cac.org/women. That's cac.org/WOMEN.
Dorcas Cheng-Tozun is an award-winning writer, editor, speaker, and social impact professional. She's the author of several books, including Social Justice for the Sensitive Soul, How to Change the World in Quiet Ways. She currently serves as Special Projects Lead with the Changemaker Initiative. And you can learn more about Dorcas by following the link in our show notes. And just a note about today's conversation. It covers a wide range of topics, some of which include mental health challenges and suicidal ideation. So please remember to take good care of yourself and your needs as you listen to this incredible conversation between Mike, Carmen, and Dorcas.
Dorcas, oh my gosh, welcome to the Everything Belongs podcast. We are so excited to have you here and to get to share you with our listeners.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
Dorcas, cannot believe we're getting to sit down with you.
Especially as someone who lives between the Enneagram 4 and the Enneagram 2. I don't know if y'all do this, but the sign that my partner and I are really loving a book over here is that we each have our own hard copy and we have the audiobook all going at the same time. And we're sort of syncing it all the time and talking about it. And we have been loving discussing social justice for the sensitive soul. Carmen, I know you loved it as much as I did.
You remember that article that you wrote about being in Sichuan province, helping 21,000 Yi families have safe and reliable life. And so
Excellent
I was
memory.
like, wow. Yeah, I was like, what a beautiful writer, and also what bravery and helpfulness. But then when I was reading your book, Social Justice for the Sensitive Soul, a couple of years ago, to hear the other side of the story,
Right.
when you described the panic attack. And I found that so relatable. And I thought, I've been looking for this book my whole life. You talk about getting to know yourself and accept yourself. How did you come to the Enneagram? How did that happen?
So when I graduated from college, there was a non-denominational church that I started attending. And everybody there, especially the pastors and the leaders, they all loved the Enneagram and were constantly talking about it. And it really intrigued me because I was like, well, what is this? And so then I started digging. And one of Father Rohr's books was one of the first Enneagram books I read. I read The Wisdom of the Enneagram by Don Richard Riso and Russ Hudson. And so that's when I was like, okay. So that was my introduction to the Enneagram.
So I'm curious, how did you find your number and what did you think then when you did? I mean, how was that encounter?
Yes. So I first thought that I was an Enneagram 2, which maybe you can relate to, Mike.
Yeah.
Because I had become really passionate about social justice when I was in college and then went straight into the nonprofit sector. And that was what I felt like I wanted to devote my life to. And so it seemed like this perfect fit of like, yeah, of course, I'm taking care of people, wanting to help people. I am a 2. It all makes sense. I had a couple of folks around me who were like, well, maybe you're a 3, because I definitely had that kind of high achiever thing going on. But it wasn't until we were living in China and things became so difficult. And the degree to which our experience weighed on me in a way that it did not seem like it affected those around me in the same way, it was really striking. And I kept thinking, what's wrong with me? Am I weaker than everyone else? Why is it causing me so much pain when others seem okay? And so then I got to that point of the panic attack, followed by severe depression, anxiety, all these things. I was still in China, so I had access to very limited mental health resources. So I got connected to a spiritual director here in the States, and this was way back when. So she was using Skype for the very first time, calling me, trying to figure out how that technology was working. And she was very well-versed in the Enneagram. And so after a couple of sessions of me constantly just talking about like, this is so hard. What is wrong with me? She finally just, looked me in the eye and said, have you ever considered that you might be an Enneagram 4? And then, unsurprisingly, I said, no! and then burst into tears, which is pretty much exactly what you'd expect of an Enneagram 4.
It's so true.
And it was the one type, right? Like people say, it's like your type is always the one that you are most sort of repelled by or horrified by. It was the one type out of the 9 that I was like, oh no, I will never be a 4. I just hated that idea of being called a tragic romantic or melodramatic. I was like, I do not want to be any of those things. But yeah, turns out that was me. But that was actually extraordinarily helpful. Once I got over that hump of accepting that was who I was, it actually went a long way toward explaining my experience living in a place like China, living specifically in that city that we were in, which at the time was just basically a manufacturing city. And so you had migrants coming from all over the country to work there, and they were away from their families. There was nothing to do except to work. And so it was a place of incredible loneliness and despair and to some degree misery. And I think I just absorbed that. Every day, everywhere I went, I felt that. And there were also issues with, the fact that I was Chinese American. And so my Mandarin was not good. I did not know the customs and norms, but I looked like I should. And that did not go over well with the locals. And so I got a lot of really, really harsh treatment and verbal abuse thrown at me every single day by perfect strangers. And it's the kind of thing where I think some people could sort of just brush it off and be like, whatever. But I could not. And so every day I felt like part of me was being chipped away until after 10 months. That was when I had my panic attack because I felt like I had nothing left. I just felt like I had been ground into dust.
That is so beautifully said. And I so thank you for sharing that. I sort of lived between 4 and 5, but I started out in the 2 because I just thought I was supposed to be helpful. And that was the role I was cast in. So, Mike, I know you also describe this sort of being betwixt and between in some ways.
I'm a bit of a 4 apologist, and I feel like flashy 4s get a lot of attention, and that's a lot of times what we think about with the 4 is the flash and the bang. But the deep feeling aspect of the 4 is what I'm so excited to get into in this conversation. What we've been talking about every single episode is looking at our types and all the different types that present themselves, looking at the wounds, but then recognizing how those wounds lead us to our own unique wisdom and help us find our work in the world. So we're going to go there. Can't wait to go there with you. Do you see the wound of the 4 way back in your life story?
Yeah, I do. Looking back, I think one thing that the 4 is always looking for is that sense of belonging and acceptance. In my own family, I grew up in a relatively small family. It's just my parents and my older sister and me. But there was this feeling of like, they don't get me. We think differently. And I felt the most kinship with my dad. But my dad passed away when I was 14. And that certainly would be a huge wound for anybody, regardless of their Enneagram number. But I think that amplified that sense of, I don't know where I fit in this family. That being said, it was a loving family. Just we all have our quirks and we're different. And I think the fact also that I grew up in a community that was about 95% white. And so at school, I'm Asian. I have a weird name, right? Like the kids just did not know what to do with me. And so it was actually years and years and years before I felt like I had actual genuine friends at school. And that feeling of always being on the outside, it was difficult. As I've gotten older, I had this awareness of who's being left out here. Is there someone that is not being heard? Is there someone that's not being respected? Is there someone we forgot to invite to the table? Those are the things that I am thinking about a lot because I have experienced that myself. And I also know for the sake of the person who feels marginalized, it's really important to bring them in, but also for the sake of all of us to connect with people who may think differently, who may come from different backgrounds, but to see the richness and the fullness of who we are as humanity. We need to all be willing to be in the room together and truly hear one another.
That is so beautifully said.
Yeah.
Mm.
You know, when we've wrestled with that loneliness, when we've experienced being left out, like you said, you notice the folks who are left out. I have to ask you this before we move on. We've been talking to Richard about what we're referring to as the voice of the inner accuser that tells each type that they're not enough. What's that felt like in your life?
I think there is often this voice that has been in my head that has continued to say, you don't belong, you don't have a place. Or if something happens that's hard, if somebody does something that's hurtful, they say something, I have almost always blamed myself for it. Felt like, well, there must be something wrong with me that led to the actions that that other person took. And so it is a lot of shame to carry. It's quite a bit of even guilt to carry, and that sense of like, I'm just not good enough and I'm not going to get there. It's a significant journey of the four to come to a place of true acceptance of yourself, that I am complex and messy and still beloved, absolutely beloved, no matter what I bring to the table, no matter all the baggage I carry. It doesn't change how much I am worthy of love and acceptance.
That touches a deep heartstring. What a wound to have to wrestle into wisdom. Goodness gracious. And yet, I do believe these wounds can become health bestowing wounds.
Yes.
I do love, Dorcas, how you talked about feeling always on the outside, especially in a predominantly white community. What I hear you saying is that with gentleness to self, we can really take this wound and create high EQ so that we're actually sitting there going, wow, I see you're suffering. How can I come alongside? Right?
Yeah. Well, and I do think that over time, another thing that I've learned, sort of the flip side of it all, is that it's not always a bad thing to be on the outside because you have a different perspective. You have something new to bring. Groupthink is not always the best way to go.
No.
And so it's actually really valuable to have folks. I mean, you need to hear from them. You need to give them space to share what they have to share. But there are times where I'm like, I'm kind of glad that I'm out here because it gives me a different perspective and I can see things and I can bring different insights that folks who are on the inside can't necessarily see.
Yeah, I love that. And I also really related to when you said in social justice for the sensitive soul, one of the most wonderful traits of sensitive individuals is that they tend to be very conscientious, guilty. Caring deeply about the well-being of others, we are idealistic and hope for a better world. What other wisdom do you see fours have to offer others? How can we, those of us who identify in some way with being a four, how can we be thankful for being a four?
Yeah. I do think there is this deep authenticity that fours bring to so much of what they do and how they are in the world, how they interact with others. Confession, I have zero poker face because everything that I am thinking and feeling is written all over my face, and I have never been able to hide it. And so I think there's something wonderful about that, like, what you see is who I am. This is just me. And there are a lot of folks that's hard for them. It's hard for them to bring their true selves. And it can encourage others to do that, to be like, okay, I think maybe it would be safe for me to just fully be myself, not have to wear these masks or fill these other personas. And I think the fours are also wonderful at building connections, building relationships, that I feel like oftentimes we are almost always operating at a soul level. That even when I am talking to somebody about the weather, I am still trying to connect with them at this really deep level. That's always kind of what I'm searching for. And I don't know if you all have had this experience, but I've had this more times than I would have expected where I am in a meeting or a networking event or some place where I'm meeting folks that I don't really know. And oftentimes it's a professional setting. And we sit down and we begin to talk. And I expect the conversation will go one way because, again, professional setting. And then the other person just ends up spilling their life story to me. And oftentimes, yes, it is their pain, their deepest wounds, their deepest betrayals is what comes out. And I don't ask for it. I don't say anything or tell them to, tell me all your deepest, darkest secrets, but it just comes out because people are so longing for that sense of connection. And for someone who will just be present with them, feel with them, I actually think that's a really rare gift. And I think the fact that fours are unafraid to go to those dark places, we are not afraid of those really difficult emotions, those difficult life experiences, because oftentimes we have been through it or felt some version of it, right? And so it's like, yeah, I know this. I can be in this with you and let's do it.
Yeah.
I'm here for you.
Origen, my great teacher, he has this thing he says, my interpretation of it is where he talks about like hell is not a place that we avoid, it's a place that we invade. And his metaphor is like we run in to the hurting place like battlefield medics. And I feel like those of us who've been with our trauma, been with our deep feelings, been with our sadness, deep feelers, and especially fours, we have this reputation for always diving into the depths, and that's our skill. But I feel like we can turn around and say to other people, like, come on in, the water's fine. Or if it's not fine, it's worth it. You start to feel like fours are the lifeguards at the deep end of the pool because we know how to swim.
Yeah.
Do you think fours know how to invite other folks into their own depth safely?
Probably really depends on the four.
Oh, that's a really good answer.
Right?
That's a really good and an important answer.
Yes. I think how well do we understand the particular context that we are inviting people into, as well as who are we speaking to? Is that other person, is that what they need? Is that where they are in their journey? So I don't know, but I do think there is something to almost that witness of I've been there and I've survived. I'm still standing. And so I think you can do this too. And that gets to another really important point of the fours, which is even in the midst of all the hardship and the grief and the pain and the dark places, there is something in us that's constantly looking for beauty, for hope. I think every four loves a good redemption story, right? We're constantly looking for that of like, how is this really terrible thing going to lead me toward something good? And because so many fours are creative and artistic and expressive, there is this wonderful kind of transmission of this is what I've seen, this is what I've experienced, and let me show it to you. Let me show you what it's been like, and let me point you toward where can we find this hope? Where can we find this beauty? And how do, for people who are of faith and spirituality, how can we see that God is at work here? That some greater force is still moving us toward the ultimate redemption of all of humanity.
So I really like that you've pointed out one of the strengths of this depth of feeling is simply being present when someone else is suffering. Because one of the things I hoped to become would be somebody who others could be with and just let things fall apart. And so I love the fact that you talked a lot about depth of feeling, and you talked also about shame. And one of the things I think I experienced shame around was being a highly sensitive person. Not all deep feelers are fours, and not all fours are highly sensitive personalities, okay? But we can imagine there's a pretty big overlap between those, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit more about what a highly sensitive person is?
This is a personality trait. The term was coined by psychologist Elaine Aron probably about 40 to 50 years ago now. So it's actually still a relatively new concept. But a highly sensitive person, well, for one thing, you are just wired as a highly sensitive person. It is a lot in sort of just how your brain operates. And highly sensitive folks, they tend to be very deep feelers, also very deep thinkers. So they ruminate, they contemplate, they plan, they look at all the possibilities. And it is oftentimes the case that highly sensitive folks, their sensory experience of the world in terms of what they hear, what they see, what they taste, what they physically feel, those tend to be more intense. Like they actually feel more physical pain than somebody else who might have experienced the exact same cut or bruise. Or noises might seem louder to them than they do to a typical non-sensitive person. So there is a way in which the experience of highly sensitive people and how they interact with the world, everything's kind of turned up to 11. It's a little bit more intense. So they can get sometimes a little bit overwhelmed by the world around them. And so it is healthy for highly sensitive folks to be a little bit conscientious of what stimuli they are exposing themselves to and how much of it that they can manage. But that being said, because of that sensitivity, again, a lot of highly sensitive folks are very empathic. They can read a room. They can feel what others are feeling. They know what's going on. They kind of just have this very strong intuition. They do have the ability to notice a lot of details that others may miss. They notice what is off, what is wrong, what is not the way it should be. And I think that that is a big reason why highly sensitive people do tend to care a lot about social issues, about if there's injustice going on, because we just know like that's not okay. Things shouldn't be that way. And I will say about highly sensitive people, but also fours, I think one of the big draws into the issues of justice. So, you have your Enneagram 1s and 8s who are all about like, this is wrong and this is not fair and not equal. And that's a very great way of looking at things. And I think for the 4s, so much of it is people are suffering. Their entryway into caring about justice is the recognition of human suffering. And because human suffering affects us so viscerally, it is unbearable to see our fellow human beings suffer. And we want to do what we can to alleviate that, to end it if possible. And so that is a lot of what I think will draw highly sensitive and Enneagram 4 people into the arena of wanting to serve others and advocate for justice.
So one of the things you just said that's really helpful to me in the framing is taking this conscientiousness that a 4 generally has and also turning it towards ourselves. Like not just towards the world suffering.
Very much so. Yes.
But going, wait, I'm suffering.
Yes.
And I need to be conscientious towards noticing the stimuli and if I'm being overstimulated.
Yes. And I will say it took me probably more than 20 years to learn that lesson. And I am still very much in process.
Yeah.
And I learned that the hard way because I spent years and years and years ignoring all of the signals that my body and my brain were telling me that this is too much, this is too much, this is too much. You're pushing yourself too hard. You're not resting. You're taking on too many burdens from other people. And I ignored it because I felt like my suffering is not as important as other people's suffering.
Yeah.
But I have been through so many burnouts. And I'm not just talking about I got tired and I needed a day off. Really, really serious burnouts. I had my first serious one at the age of 26, where I was so depressed that I could not get out of bed. I really could only sleep and cry and eat for months. I had to quit my job. It was months before I could even think about going back to work. At the age of 26, happened again. When I was 30, that was when I was living in China. That one was even worse, right? And it was like every successive burnout got worse and worse. It wasn't like I was getting better and learning the lesson, but it was like it had to get so bad to the point where I really could hardly bear it. And I got to the point where this was when we were living in China. We were living in a 30-story high rise because everyone lives in a high rise in these cities. And there were days where I very, very seriously thought about just throwing myself off the top of the building because the pain was so hard to bear. And this sense of my own worthlessness, that I wasn't contributing anything meaningful to the world. Fours love having purpose and meaning, and I couldn't find any of it because all I could do was cry and sleep. And yet at the same time, now looking back, I see that now as a time where all of these coping mechanisms I had been using that were incredibly unhealthy, they all broke. They were completely shattered during that period of time because nothing worked for me anymore. And I had to start over from the ground up of figuring out what does it look like for me to, well, one, survive and just keep going and not want to end it all. And what does it look like for me to truly be myself, but in a way where joy is possible for me and the people around me, where thriving is possible, where hopefully I can do the work that I love to do and I feel called to do for longer than a couple years at a time. And I think the belief that ultimately God is not calling us to work that is going to ground us into dust.
Oh my gosh. I thank you so much for the vulnerability and authenticity in sharing that. I think a lot of us listening resonate. I'd love to spend our remaining time unpacking all the wisdom that you just gave us there, but I want to start with a thank you. I've always fought this idea that I should be able to do more and that there's something wrong with me. And despite all the good therapy and all the good healing, when I read your book, the first big gift that it gave me was a reminder that there's nothing wrong with me, that this is the way that I'm wired, that this is actually, this sensitivity is my superpower. It's what I bring into the arena of putting my healing in the service of healing the world. What advice would you give folks for, one, appreciating the gift of that depth of feeling, and then two, not drowning in it?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that a lot of people don't have access to their feelings in the same way that fours do. And so it is a unique gift that we bring. It's something that we can model for others. And like I was saying before, that ability to connect with our own emotions gives us a leg up in connecting with the emotions of others. I think it is important to recognize that we all have limits, that we are not doing ourselves or others any good. If I almost felt like I had this responsibility to take on the emotional burdens of the world somehow, that if I did that, it would alleviate it for others. And unfortunately, I don't think it quite works that way. So that plan did not go well. But to recognize that I am already feeling deep compassion, deep empathy. I am already being driven to act. I don't need to sort of keep hammering that into myself. So, a really practical way that I have done that in recent years is, and I think this is probably my 5 wing. I love to know. I'm all about like, what is going on in the world? I want to know the current events. I want to know everything that's happening. And so I have been a news junkie for many, many years, but it did get to the point where it was just too much. So I have specifically or intentionally, I'll say, limited my access to news. And I give myself the grace to be like, okay, I don't have to know every single detail of everything that's happening. I don't need to know every story of every person suffering because I know that it will be too much for me, but I know enough. And I also want to leave space in my life. I don't want all of my emotional energy to go toward the problems of the world because there are very real people right in front of me who have needs. My kids, my family members, my friends. But I think there is something really valuable about giving ourselves a little bit of margin of, well, and what about that neighbor that you randomly run into, or that community member that you reconnect with, or an old friend you haven't seen in a long time who is in need? and to give yourself space for those moments where you can show up in real life with real people right in front of you. I need to not already be completely full in terms of all the emotional hardship that I can bear. I need to leave a little bit of space to manage everything else that's thrown at me. And then I will say one other thing is really important is to counterbalance all the really, really difficult things happening in the world, all that we're seeing, all that we're reading about, to also really look for what is hopeful, what is good, what is beautiful, because it's always there. And that gives me a lot of hope and endurance to continue moving forward.
Dorcas, your teaching is such good medicine because it really made me teary-eyed when you were sharing about the burnouts, because I find that so relatable, because that's how I used to cope with trying not to feel and feeling so much with just work and burnout and rest. But it got more dangerous each time, as you said, because living with suicidal ideations, as I used to, is very tiring, right? And one of the things you've helped me see is that this burnout does help a person who turns to God in grace or just stops and listens to the silence that is so mystical to see what is authentic. So the burnout has helped me see what I am not. I am not this need to produce. I am not this need to be there for everybody. I am not this person who is self-loathing. I am somebody who can cherish myself and others and simply be there. So your authenticity comes through in all that you do. And can you talk about, like, if fours are experts, sometimes in my case, by making painful, slow progress in authenticity, can they help others in some way be authentic as well?
I find the more that we share of ourselves to others, then we can create those spaces where it is safe for them to share as well. But it does take practice. And I think to be patient with other folks, to recognize that for some people, this is going to be really, really hard. And it's going to take them time to get there. And maybe they'll just start with, one little phrase here or one anecdote there. It's like, okay, if that's all you are ready to give, okay, that's fine, right? And to just be with people in that journey and continue to practice acceptance and love and grace, no matter where they're at.
That's
Gosh,
beautiful.
that's so good. Thinking fours are kind of the alchemists of authenticity. But I wonder about this. I feel like fours get a bad rap sometimes. As I was reading your book, I started to wonder, for both highly sensitive people and fours, there's this sort of ESP for picking up on inauthenticity. So when there's double binds, when there's unspoken scripts, the shadows of a group, the groupthink that no one wants to say out loud, I feel like we pick up on this almost immediately and have this compelling pressure to push back on it. Do you think that's accurate? And if so, are fours and sensitive folks providing an essential service by doing that? I know it doesn't always make us popular.
Yes, it does not always go well. I think there are times when speaking up makes sense. There are times when maybe it is better to wait, find a different moment to have a one-on-one conversation instead of speaking up in a group. I do think we need to be a little bit strategic about how we deploy this gift. Gosh, like when there is an elephant in the room, it feels like this 20-ton thing that cannot be ignored. And why are all of you pretending to ignore it, right? It drives me bonkers. But there is a time and a place, I think, to speak out. And some of that wisdom sort of just comes with practice, learning, understanding. And so maybe that's where our 3 wings and 5 wings can kind of help us out in figuring out, how best to manage those situations. I've also been thinking about what is it to learn from others without feeling like I have to emulate them? Because fours also have this tendency to either idealize people, things, organizations, causes, or vilify them. It's either one or the other. You're wonderful and amazing, or you are horrible. And that spiritual director I talked about before, that was one of the things she said to me probably a dozen times. But she always said to me, nothing is all good or all bad. No person is all good or all bad. No place is all good or all bad. And your work is to recognize that complexity, recognize the both and I think that's one of the really interesting ways in which God gifts us and challenges us. Because fours are so much about comparing to others and how am I doing compared to so and so, and but this person's achieved this that I haven't. But the fact that we are each on our own individual journey, I do feel like at some point in life, you will get to a point where it's actually almost impossible to compare yourself with anybody else anymore, because the way I have gotten here and the way that I am headed, I can't necessarily find anybody else who has been that way, which is actually a gift, because then I truly can embrace the ways in which God has made me and you and everybody else unique and gifted us with our own journey in this life that we have.
Dorcas, I love that. And what I love is how you are doing this. As a 4, you're using your superpowers to help others find their own authenticity and to find their unique work to do in the world. And you say this in your book. You write, the fight for social justice is ugly these days. We live in a time of anger, confrontation, deep division, distorted realities. We need to be reminded of our shared humanity and of our ability to connect and love, of our potential for good. Effective social advocacy and lasting social change require gentleness, nonviolence, empathy, collaboration, and creativity. It's a big ask, but this burden isn't yours to bear alone. One of the barriers that you identify that sort of keeps us from doing that is this idea of the activist ideal. And you do a really great job in your book of asking whether or not the activist ideal is really the gold standard that we should measure ourselves up against. And then you give us some beautiful examples of other ways that we can show up and do meaningful work. What is the activist ideal, and is it helpful?
The super short answer is it is not helpful. But specifically, it is this impossible standard that has been set in the culture of activism. This is not just one person saying it, one organization saying it. It is pervasive in activist culture these days, and it has been documented by social science researchers, where there's an expectation that you will give everything you have, all your energy, all your time, all your skills and abilities toward the cause that you are working on, to the point where your own health doesn't matter, your family doesn't matter, your desire to rest does not matter, and you are actually looked down upon. So there's a sense of it has to be all or nothing. And you cannot have anything else in your life that matters more than this cause. And it has led to, unsurprisingly, these crazy burnout rates. So the typical social activist burns out within 3 to 5 years, and then they leave and they never come back because they do not know how to be in these spaces in a healthy and sustainable way because no one is modeling it for them. And so I am really concerned about this activist ideal, and I really would love for more organizations, community groups, leaders, managers to be much more conscientious of what does it look like to truly invest in, prioritize, value the people we have, because they are our greatest asset and they are beloved in and of themselves. And for them to thrive, they need to rest. They need to have other hobbies. They need to have loved ones in their life. We cannot just treat them as workhorses and then discard them when we're done with them. And I think that we can only make really significant progress moving forward if we begin to shift this culture of activism to make it more sustainable.
Oh my gosh, so
That
good.
is good.
Yes, which is the work that you guys are all in.
We're in it together, right?
Yes.
We're trying.
So do you have any last advice, Dorcas, on how we can find our work soulfully and authentically?
One thing that has been so helpful for me has been permission to experiment, that in looking for our purpose, you don't have to always jump in with 2 feet. You don't have to go in knowing exactly what is going to happen. I think it is perfectly fine to try something out, to visit an organization or meet with a group or an individual to learn more, to do something for one day and see how it feels, or to try a job without knowing if you're going to stick there for the long run, right? It's okay. I think that so many of us are on this very windy path with twists and turns, and every experience we have is part of our learning journey. Even if it doesn't last long, even if it doesn't go well, it is okay. And I don't think that calling or vocation, I think most of the time it is not something that is just going to drop into our lap. It is something we need to seek and something that may be a little bit hidden, and to have fun with it. It can be a joyous experience.
Thank you, Dorcas.
So good.
You are so welcome.
This has been so rich.
It was such a gift for me to be with you guys. I really appreciate you.
Mike, it is amazing to kind of sit back and be a listener with everyone and just learn so much about the Enneagram 4 today. I have so many 4s in my life, and I cherish the uniqueness and the heart that they bring to every situation they're in. They're the kind of people that you find yourself in conversation with, and they just can't help but go deep, to take you deep. As we heard in this episode, they're great space holders, and they don't fear what comes up in the room. And as Richard says, if we don't have 4s, not only would our world lack some depth, but also some color.
Absolutely. I mean, this is one of the reasons I constantly found myself thinking that I was a 4. And more to the point, I had other people always telling me that they thought I was a 4, because the energy in a space makes so much sense to me. Beauty and creativity matters so much to me. And it's funny, people would just look at the way that I dress, and because I dress kind of colorfully, they would assume that I was a 4. When I was younger, I was very, very blessed to grow up in a church and a school where there were so many different people and so many different cultures from all around the globe represented, that I was surrounded by men who wore bright, colorful clothing with gorgeous textures and beautiful patterns. And I just fell in love with it. And then later, when my folks moved into more white middle-class America, and my options seemed to be limited to plaid and khaki, my heart kind of died a little inside. I'm not going to lie. There are few things that a 4 fears more than a life devoid of color.
And when I hear that, I also hear dimension and texture and these multitude of tactile ways of living, right? Like bringing this dimension to life.
Yeah, externally and internally. 4s dig depth big time. We go real deep.
Yeah.
You know, I think 4s have a really special relationship to belonging. They're naturals at longing and yearning, living in the nostos, the longing for home. And there's a mystical bent in that. And there's a longing for the depth of the soul and the spirit. And like I said, they cultivate depth no matter where they are. They strive for authenticity. But that longing is not just for them. A healthy 4 wants everyone to find their way home. I think of that great line from Ram Dass, we're all just walking each other home. That's where a healthy 4 wants to live. They want everyone to find their own unique authenticity. They want everyone to get in touch with their depth. And I think that's why healthy 4s have so much to teach us and so many great places to take us.
Yeah. And I think in that way, Mike, do you feel like 4s are kind of guides in guiding us towards our own authenticity, like natural guides in that sense? In fact, I think of you and the 4 in you and how you've inspired me to be more colorful in some of the things I wear. I remember once we were at a conference together and we had a vest day.
So funny. At that same conference, someone came up to me and said, they were like, what is going on here with your fashion? I just assumed listening to the podcast, you were wearing khakis and sweater vests. So when we talk about a vest day, we are talking about pretty colorful, creative expressions. And I love that. And also, I think everyone's natural expression is beautiful. If sweaters and khakis are your thing, like have at it.
Yeah.
Have fun. Be you. It's what I love about how in this show, we look at how every number has something to teach us. And our wounds and our wonder lead us to our unique wisdom and our unique work in the world. And that is beautiful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm kind of the type that just wears black t-shirts all the time. So it's fun to experiment with those parts of ourselves and find out what is the color we're bringing to the world. No matter our number, no matter our personality, it might not be in clothing, I guess is what I'm saying. There's all kinds of ways to bring our beauty.
And what I loved about this conversation with Dorcas was she let us go deep into the depth of a 4 in a way that's beyond the stereotype. Again, 4s are such deep feelers, so everybody wants to think of the 4 as someone who's dramatic. And she's like, no, the 4 is deeply sensitive. They feel everything, including the hurt of the world. That's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah. And I guess this brings us to one of my favorite things of the month, which is our reflection questions. And in thinking about this, one of the things I want to open us with is, where can I quiet myself or find moments of silence to hear the authenticity within? And Mike, as a 4 yourself, I'm sure you have plenty of reflection questions that you've reflected on for a lifetime.
One of the things they talk about is that 4s have this deep longing for home. And I feel that in my bones. I've had reoccurring dreams my entire life that I'm driving around trying to find my home and I never get there. So one of the questions I like to ask myself is, what is the home that my heart longs for? If I could wave a magic wand and have everything I've ever wanted, what would that even look like? And how would I know if I was there?
That's powerful. And that longing is so real, so real. So another question might be, when the longing or the need to be special keeps me from seeing others and myself honestly, how can I push pause and regain traction in the present moment?
Yeah, it's wild. When we lean into that need to be special, it can become a black hole drawing on everything around us. So a question that I like to sit with is, how can I become all the validation that I need for my own specialness? And then I don't need it from the world around me, And how can I practice that every day to love and validate my own authenticity?
At a challenging time in my life, I had this list on an envelope, on the back of an envelope, a list of kind of affirmations that I would read to myself at particular times. The beginning of my meditation set, actually, and it always ended with, I am here, I am here, I am here. And recognizing, just different ways we can affirm ourselves. We can affirm that specialness of ourselves, for ourselves. It's a really powerful question. And to take that maybe deeper, but also maybe a different direction, I'm thinking about Richard's book now, The Immortal Diamond. And in that, he talks a lot about the true self. And he reminds us that our true self, our authentic self, knows we are not alone and that we belong to God. And he also notes that the true self knows we are intrinsically important. So maybe the question here is, how can I learn to see my innate belonging through the eyes of God?
Oof, that's so good. That's so good. And then God becomes all the validation that we need. I think the danger for 4s at the end of the day in our desire to be our authentic selves and to be special is that we can start to think we're not special enough, or we're not weird enough, or we're not authentic enough. And then it becomes this competition. And one of the best ways that I've found to get out of that is to let the love of authenticity become a gift and to start to ask myself, how can I help others to be their truest, authentic selves? And I would love to leave our listeners with that. What is one thing you can do this month to celebrate someone you love being authentic? And that's not being who you think they should be, but help them to love and celebrate the beautiful person that they already are. In fact, Cassidy, on that note, one of my favorite parts of this conversation and Dorcas's book was when she shared with us about how we can find our authentic selves and our authentic work by letting go of what she calls the activist ideal. Wow, I related when she talked about how too many of us think that working to change the world is limited to this image of the person who is out there on the front line of every single protest, or these days spending every single free minute arguing on social media. In fact, we have a bonus clip for you where Dorcas shares 6 very specific ways that folks work to change the world. 6 ways which are utterly indispensable and all too often invisible. In our bonus clip, you'll hear Dorcas invite us to find ourselves in the work of connectors, creators, record keepers, builders, equippers, or researchers. As always, you can sign up to receive this bonus audio content along with our discussion questions and other goodies at cac.org/belongs2026. That's cac.org/BELONGS2026.
We look forward to hanging out with you all next month when we talk about the Enneagram 5, which I might argue, Mike, is the best number out there simply because I am one.
And I celebrate that because I want you to live out of your authenticity and your deep feeling. There's nothing a 4 wants more than for everyone to be in love with exactly who they are.
That's right. I'll keep wearing my black t-shirts.
Thanks for listening to this podcast by the Center for Action and Contemplation, an educational nonprofit that introduces seekers to the contemplative Christian path of transformation. To learn more about our work, visit us at cac.org. Everything Belongs is made possible thanks to the generosity of our supporters and the shared work of
Mike Petro,
Paul Swanson,
Drew Jackson,
Carmen Acevedo Butcher,
Jenna Kuiper,
Izzy Spitz,
Megan Hare,
Sarah Palmer,
Dorothy Abrams,
Brandon Strange,
Vanessa Yee,
Cassidy Hall,
and me, Corey Wayne. The music you hear is composed and provided by our friends Hammock. And we'd also like to thank Sound On Studios for all of their work in post-production. From the high desert of New Mexico, we wish you peace and every good.
Do you feel called to walk a more contemplative path? The Center for Action and Contemplation is an educational nonprofit supporting the journey of inner transformation. Our programs and resources will help grow your consciousness, deepen your prayer practice, and strengthen your compassionate engagement with the world. Learn more about our resources, such as publications, podcasts, email series, and events at www.cac.org.